Golden State Media Concepts Technology Podcast covers everything tech. The hottest mobile phones, tablets, games. We review it, rate it, test it. Whether you're Microsoft or Apple, Android or iPhone, we'll give it to you again. Black and white. The Golden State Media Concepts Technology Podcast.
Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Technology Podcast. I'm your host, Shay Northrup.
And I'm Jonathan Charney.
And we're going to be talking to you guys about the Blackberry, a car-frying skyscraper, Chromecast, the Roku, deep diving robots, and a man who just hates iPhones. Now, to start us all off, we're going to talk to you guys a little bit about BlackBerry's bailing out on building its own phones. So the Canadian company said on Wednesday that it will shut down its own phone business after the failure of its latest bid to use Google Android software to simulate interest. Instead, it says that it's going to rely on others to design and build the devices to save on capital.
Now, is this still going to be BlackBerry phones, or is this something that they're just going to have the software so you can install it like on an Android phone?
Well, the CEO, John Chen, has said himself in the past that he would drop out of phones if the business couldn't generate profit, and it has definitely not been generating profit. They have been losing out on, what was it? They have a loss of $372 million, or 71 cents a share from a year ago. Like, that's just in a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm not really surprised. I mean, for one, I think when the iPhone came around and some of the better Androids came around, it kind of blew everything BlackBerry was doing out of the water.
Right. Well, and I know like BlackBerry was only centered around white-collar workers and white-collar workforce in like the early 2000s, but it couldn't really do anything that fancy.
Also, don't forget, Barack Obama, United States current president, was also famous for being the first president to use a smartphone. So it was also something that was allowed to be used in government circles because of its ability for encryption and security.
Right. So CEO John Chen has said himself in a statement that the company plans to end all internal hardware development and will outsource that function to its partners. So it looks like we're seeing the end of BlackBerry. I wouldn't be surprised if this company just isn't around in the next couple of years.
See, I never understood why they just didn't refocus to become a software company. I mean, I've always figured it was simple enough that you could integrate their software into Android and iOS and still keep all their security and protocols in place.
I don't know. Honestly, I don't see after the smartphone came out, I don't see them being able to do much of anything.
I still think there's a market for security, and I think if they turn themselves into an app company like BlackBerry Messenger, BlackBerry Mail, BlackBerry this, I think you could do it. Matter of fact, you could probably have a BlackBerry phone app, for example, that was a secure phone app that uses Wi-Fi or your data plan. See, I think there's a need out there for that. I just don't see.
Well, maybe that's what they're going to plan on doing. Like, I know that they're planning on outsourcing their phone building. Maybe they are planning on doing some more security-related things. And I can tell you, it would be nice to see a lot more security on the Android.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I think the iPhone definitely has above a lot of the other ones is there's only a certain number of permissions you can actually get on iOS. Android, there's famously a flashlight app that wanted access to everything.
Oh, yeah. Well, what was it? There are ringtone apps that want access to your pictures. Like, why?
Yeah, and it's either poor programming or somebody just wants to do some mischief, just wants to get in trouble,
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I just think it's a really bad idea for permissions, and I think this is perfect. I do think BlackBerry has a future in business if they just shift and refocus on software. Because it's still, I think, one of the only few smartphones I thought that was allowed to use in secure locations.
Right. Well, again, I'm not sure. I haven't heard a lot about BlackBerry in the last couple of years. I know I remember hearing about them having a new line of phones, but none that I don't think anybody would buy. They were ridiculously overpriced.
It seems like, I know they had a tablet that bombed, and they've had a number of new iterations for smartphones, and they've done poorly. Like, so poorly, I remember hearing about the fanfare, and then literally a month later, nothing. You couldn't even find the phone in stores. Like, 'cause I remember looking for it.
Like since 2009, I have not seen a BlackBerry.
I've seen few of them on older businessmen and women. Some people in government still use them, but I haven't seen as much as I did because for a while they were everywhere.
Well, it's funny that like Nokia's even still doing better than BlackBerry.
That's funny. I know Nokia is allegedly making a comeback because I know when Microsoft purchased their phone, the phone part of Nokia, there was actually a clause built in that after so many years they could actually start building phones again.
Well, one of the things too with Nokia is they still market them as indestructible.
Their cheap phones are really hard to beat up.
Yeah. Well, and even their smartphones and tablets that they were doing was one of the things that were always been a thing with Nokia is that you can't destroy them.
I just wish they used better software.
Yeah.
So with that being said, we're going to go into something that, we felt was just a little amusing. There's a building in London called the Walkie-Talkie Skyscraper that has been literally melting cars. And I mean literally melting cars. There's actually a video attached to this, and unfortunately I don't have a link for you. But what this building is, I think was it a concave?
Yeah.
I think it's a concave design building by the look of it on the video. And it focuses just right that it actually starts like cars and some of the businesses nearby smoking. Now, there's a business nearby that gets the entrance so hot that it's actually causing their carpet and other things inside the building itself to start smoking and catching fire.
Well, it also got so hot on the tiles of a coffee shop that it cracked the tiles in the coffee shop.
And I know this particular video, there's a guy with the old can it hard boil an egg or can it cook an egg?
Yeah, fry an egg.
Yeah, that's it. Excuse me.
And it did.
to butcher metaphors. And it literally did. The guy had a cast iron pan, and he was even talking how hot this is.
One of the things that's actually really funny is some of the people are calling the skyscraper the Walkie Scorchy.
Now, there's a description on the video I want to read just because I thought it was funny. Let's see, the guy was skeptical about this task and assumed that it was impossible to fry an egg. However, not only it was possible, he also had to run away from the death ray that was also frying the egg. There's stories about people's shoes melting, where they're standing in front of it.
Yeah, there's stories of this guy had his Jaguar and certain parts of it, the mirror in particular, were starting to melt and warp. And there's an estimated of what, like $1,000? Oh, sorry, 1,000 pounds.
Yeah, easily. So that's I think it's probably roughly $2,000.
Something about that, yeah.
I'm not really surprised. The reason why I think this is technology is, for one, is accidentally having something that's capable of melting things.
Well, it reminds me of there was a thing on BoJack Horseman where they had this poster, right? And it was just a mirror, and it said, "You are Secretariat," for the racehorse. Well, they put it on a billboard. And then I guess, so the Secretariat's mountain range, because it was reflecting the mountain range. And then they're like, what's going to happen when the 4 o'clock sun hits it? And it starts blinding all these people on the highway.
Oh, that's horrible. Oh man, that's horrible. And I thought driving to work when the sun's rising up was bad enough in my rearview mirror.
Well, I know there's a couple. This isn't the first time that structures have had this problem. I know there were a couple. There's an artist who builds buildings, like architectural buildings, and he does them for like certain harmonics places in and around the country. Whoever's doing the big bands and stuff like that, and people have complained about them before. I think it was in Chicago.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. On this particular video, I think is at least a couple of years old. The most interesting thing about it is like around the discussion about how to fix it. And if you look at some of the forums and the talking about it, it's interesting. All the way things from special coating on the windows to knocking it down and restarting.
Oh my God! And
so that's the question. One of the things I have for Shay, a little kind of how would you fix it? How would you fix it?
I would like to see special coating on the windows. I don't think knocking it down would be the best option, especially for the businesses in there. Although I would say the contractors are probably going to enjoy that option.
Right? Hey, I don't know. I mean,
maybe they can put a giant curtain in front of it.
That would be awesome. Just one of those giant ones you get from Walmart, just the slide down,
Oh God.
I actually think this is cool. I think the fact that it's capable of doing this is pretty amazing. I think a special coating or something. I do think the problem though is How do they pay the people who lost parts in cars? Matter of fact, on the video, they even talked about how there are certain spaces in front of the buildings and businesses that are actually cordoned off because those are some of the hottest spots on the street.
Yep.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break, and after we get back, we're going to be talking about...
Oh, we're going to be talking to you guys a little bit about the 4K Google Chromecast, and we're going to talk to you guys about Roku's new 4K.
Yay!
Exciting stuff.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMc Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's GSMcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMcpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Technology Podcast. We're going to talk to you guys about some 4K. Now, it looks like the Roku has 3 new boxes that are out. So
wait, but before we get too much into it, I think we should at least tell people what the Roku is.
Oh, yeah. If you're not familiar with the Roku is basically a home theater system in a stick.
So I like to tell people what the Roku does is it gives you a smart TV without the smart TV.
Well, and they update pretty frequently, which is nice.
See, my co-host Shay said one of the drawbacks of most smart TVs, not all of them, but one of the big problems about it is if you buy a 2016 model TV, and then a year later the 2017s come out, they don't always update the software within your TV. The reason why I'm a big fan, and I'm a huge fan of Roku, is they update their software. That whole box is their bread and butter, and that is really the only accoutrement you really need. You don't need anything else because this does everything.
Except video games, but yeah.
It has some video games. They're just a little awkward.
Does it really?
Yeah.
Like what?
What was it? Angry Birds.
Oh my God, that's not a video game.
So there are some video games, but the reason I like it, because if you go, and I'm assuming they're changing the models' names, but the Roku 2 and up actually has a USB port on the side. The benefit to that is you can plug in a hard drive, a USB thumb drive,
yes,
and watch external media.
They also have SD card slots. Some of them do. Some of the newer ones.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, the more expensive one, the $100 one, it comes with a quad-core processor, plays 4K video, and I think it comes with a remote too.
The coolest thing, and I'm pretty sure they're sticking with this on the old Roku 3. I don't know if they're changing the names of each one, but the old Roku 3 had this really weird feature of that you could listen to the Roku through the remote.
Oh, cool.
They even came with a pair of headphones, and I remember talking to people.
This one comes with headphones.
I remember talking to people, like they would say, "Oh, I love this because I want to watch movies, and my husband's sleeping." And even though I find it a little weird that you're listening through the remote, it's amazing. I'm a huge fan, and I promise this is a non-paid advertisement. I'm just a huge. I've had people who have talked to me about it from 18 to 80. Nobody has ever had any issues.
So there's the mid-tier and higher level ones. There's the Premiere and Premiere Plus. There's also the Roku Ultra, which is there's one for $30, one for $100, and one for $130.
Now, I remember reading they do have right now called the Roku 4. That was one of the very first, or probably one of the better 4K boxes, and that was near 4K quality because what it did is it actually upconverted to it. Now, is this upconverting and plays 4K content?
The mid-tier ones, Premiere and Premiere Plus, they pull full 4K video and 60 frames per second. The Roku Ultra, which is supposed to replace the Roku 4, does full 4K as well. And I think it's a little bit smaller because I think they're now more of a box rather than just a stick. If you want the Roku Express, which is supposed to replace the Roku One, I believe that's a stick.
Interesting. So
it's 75% smaller too.
I wonder if they're replacing the composite connections, because one of the reasons a lot of people like the Roku One is that still had the composite. If you don't know what I'm talking about, a lot of people used to call them the RCA jacks. It's the red, white, and yellow connectors.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of stuff out there that it's used to like convert to that. Like there's a lot of conversion boxes and stuff like that you can get.
And they have really weird cables like HDMI to composite, which I didn't think technically would work because the HDCP compliancy issues. HDCP, if you don't know what it is it's a control scheme. You can technically play full 1080p and 4K, if I remember correctly, through the component cables. The component cables were 3 colors. The colors were split up to 3 different cables. Technically, you can do 1080p out of that because they didn't want you to. In order to play full 1080p Blu-rays, you had to have HDMI. Just a little random tip, I guess.
Mm-hmm. It still would not look HD on a standard definition TV, though.
Oh, no, not even close to
That's possible. One of those things that I remember when the DVD player came out. A lot of people were like, this doesn't look any different than tape. Well, it's because you're using a standard definition television. Now,
is there anything different? Does it give you any breakdown about far as what each model does? Because I know the 1, 2, and 3 all have a little bit of differences that make it worth it.
Now, the first one is just a stick. I don't even think it comes with a remote.
It probably does because they actually have like right now it's like $49.99. They have the Roku streaming stick. It's literally just an HDMI stick with a remote. So it has to come with one because how else would you use it?
Right. Well, so the Express Box, which is to replace the Roku One, it's just HD, so there's no 4K. The Premiere and Premiere Plus support 4K at 60 frames per second. It also has an enhanced remote, is what it says, with a headphone jack. So the Roku Ultimate has a couple extra features. So it's 4K and HDR video, but it has a Find My Remote function on the remote, as well as an AB gaming button.
That's
also,
awesome.
It has night listening mode, which compresses the audio levels of video you're watching, so that way loud music, harsh explosion sounds will more closely match the dialogue levels of the programming, which is something I wish everything had, because for some reason audio mixers seem to think that you need to make the dialogue really quiet and the music really loud.
That is something in movies that's the bane of my existence. You can barely hear the conversation because the music's in 11. So I do have a question about frame rates, and I know you're the man that knows. Now, why is 60 frames a second such a big deal? Because they obviously said, we can do this.
Well, for 4K, they talk about how it's supposed to smooth out 4K video. Honestly, I hate 60 frames per second. Now, I'm not sure how it's going to look in 4K because I've never seen 60 frames per second in 4K. I've only ever watched it at 24 frames per second. But 60 frames per second is... So the standard film FPS is 24 frames per second. Now, that gives you the standard film look. It's a little bit more blurry, kind of, like with movement and stuff like that. It seems a little bit more dreamlike. The way our eye sees is a little bit more like 30 frames per second, which is what TV is usually set at. And then you get 60 frames per second, which is, honestly, a lot of soap operas use 60 frames per second.
I've noticed it. It gives it kind of a plasticky, kind of vaguely
kind of
fake
feel.
look.
Yeah. My girlfriend's smart TV converts to 60 frames per second, and they don't want me to touch it. Like, I'm just like, hey, can I fix this for you so it doesn't look terrible? They're like, it doesn't look terrible. I'm like, can I please fix this for you? It looks terrible.
So how would you fix it?
A lot of times you can go into the manual settings and actually tell, the TV what frame rates to set at. A lot of TVs are set to 60 frames per second with a factory setting because of display models. So that way when they're displaying it, it looks better than it actually might look. Like, looks better, right?
Now, I do, this is a little bit of a sidebar. I remember a couple of years ago, The Hobbit came out in 48 frames a second. Is that better than 60?
Well, I guess. I don't know. I didn't see it. I heard a lot of people that went to that screening say that you could really tell that they were wearing a lot of makeup. Like,
really?
That they could see, all the little prosthetics and stuff like that they were using. But I don't know if that's true. Basically, 48 is just times 2 of 24. So you're seeing more pictures. So basically, essentially, every frame is a picture. So you're seeing 24 pictures per second. And that's what makes the illusion of movement, essentially.
Interesting. And I do have a little bit of news about the Google Chromecast, not a whole lot. As there's expected to be a firmware and hardware refresh coming up soon for the Chromecast. There's no comment on price, but from everything I have read about it, is supposed to be doing 4K.
Nice.
Which I guess it's supposed to be called the Chromecast Ultra. The most interesting thing about a 4K video is there's still not a lot of sources for it, and the number one thing for 4K to delivery is internet. So the one drawback is bandwidth, something that Roku, Google, and nobody else really talks about. Is if you don't really have something capable of doing high-speed internet, and by the way, this is more than the 1.5 to 3 megabits a second that most AT&T DSL subscribers get, you're not going to get it.
Well, one of the things that you should also note, because a lot of people I know say, well, I've never seen 4K before. If you've been to a movie in the last year and a half, you've seen 4K.
Matter of fact, you might see even more than 4K, because I know actual film and some digital actual cameras get more than 4K, like 10K.
For film, it's 16.
16K?
Yeah, it's equivalent to 16K if you watch something on film.
Because I know, I swear I've seen somewhere in one of the theaters in one of the movies I've going to lately that they say is, they give it like you're watching whatever K, like it'll be greater than 4K.
Yeah, but if you've been to a theater in the last, couple months, you've seen 4K.
I do think one of the differences, though, is I don't think in a theater presentation like that, I don't think you see 4K as much. I don't think the eye sees it as much unless
Well, it's because the screen is so big. Now, one of the things that you should keep in mind, too, like, it ruined Alice in Wonderland for me. I didn't really like the new Alice in Wonderland anyway, but, like, you could definitely tell Johnny Depp was just caked in makeup. It didn't look natural at all.
I'm not particularly surprised by that, honestly.
Also, After Earth. I watched After Earth in 4K, one of the first premiere 4K screenings. I got to see it at Cinegear, which is an expose for cameras and stuff. So if you had a ticket to Cinegear, which is also free, by the way, you just have to go to LA. They do free screenings if you're if you stand in line long enough and get in. So I got to see After Earth in 4K. And this was the first time I ever saw 4K. One of the first times it was projected at a theater, and it looked like everything was like on a backdrop. Like well, for one thing, the movie has some of the worst CG ever, but like it felt like everything was on a green screen.
Oh, really? So it felt like the old rear projection type of bad.
Yeah, like and it wasn't so bad later in the movie, but in the opening of the movie, it was very apparent.
Wow. So with that being said, on a very sad note, we're going to be going to a break, and when we come back from the break, we're going to be talking about deep diving robots.
And iPhones.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch, whatever it may be.
Somewhere prowling the deep of the western Atlantic Ocean, there is a new robot that is dispatching an invasive predator. And it's the lionfish. So I guess we've come up with a robot designed to target and dispatch these invasive fish. So I guess it's one of those situations where, much like Burmese pythons in Florida, a lot of people had lionfish at one point. That because they look cool in cages, lionfish, if you're not familiar, are a fish with a lot of like spiny needles.
Yeah, they're a very poisonous fish,
and they're voracious predators. And there's really nothing on this hemisphere that really kills them and eats them. Like, they don't have a predator.
I would say that if you don't know what they look like, everybody's seen an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. That's the fish Captain Picard had in his little fish bowl in his little office there on the side of the bridge.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're right.
It is.
I don't know if you guys like Star Trek The Next Generation. It's one of my favorite shows. So they built a robot that is about 2 feet long, about 0.8 meters in length. And what it does is it has like a zapper, and it's sent to zap and kill lionfish with electrical charges and then capture them like in a net type thing on the inside. So that way they can pull the fish out of the water after it's died. So, and it's really funny. The thing that I find really interesting about this is that it was created by Roomba, the guys who do the little vacuums. So, iRobot Technology, that's the name of the company that makes the little Roombas. But I just think it's funny that they went from like vacuum cleaning robots to fish killers.
Next, they're going to try to take out Will Smith. I actually think this is kind of cool, just based on the fact that the species is kind of just taking over habitats and just being very invasive.
Well, I just think it's really funny that the CEO of this company says, we'll be their first predator. They won't see us coming. Like, they're really excited about helping the environment.
No, I'm really curious on how exactly. Is this like a standard? Was it ROV? Is it tethered? I'm assuming it's tethered. Like, is there any more information on it?
So the article itself mentions that the robot itself has an operator. So I'm guessing it works kind of like an RC car.
Okay, so it's like the standard remote operated vehicles that they use underwater. It's one that's purpose built to zap lionfish.
So it has 3D renders of the robot show that it has a camera, so that the user can track the lionfish remotely. At the front of the robot, there are 2 discs mounted on rods facing each other. When the fish is positioned between the discs, it will the operator presses a button that triggers the lethal electric shock of the robot.
And so they have to get close enough to the fish that it actually gets between the 2 discs, huh?
Yes. Wow. And I think that's probably kind of a good thing in of itself, so you don't end up killing the wrong thing. And
I'm assuming, if I remember correctly, I think they're fairly violent or aggressive species, so it may not be too hard to get them in between that, in that spot.
Yeah, probably not. I'm wondering how many of these we're going to go through. Like, I wonder if the lionfish are going to, like, fight back, so to speak. I also would love to see, like, I want this as a job. Like, I want to be a robot operator that kills lionfish. Like, I feel like this would be kind of a cool little... Maybe they can set it up to where like they can get like I don't know, video game testers or like little kids control it with an Xbox controller.
It's like the movie Toys all over again.
Yeah.
More power to him for trying to fix things. I mean, I'm not as impressed by that as I am about the kid who figured out how he can clean up the world's oceans, but it's still pretty neat.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. I know, like, we definitely don't want the ocean's ecosystem to get all messed up. So I think this is kind of a cool solution. And I know, like, there really is no solution for the Burmese python problem in Florida besides people wrangling them up.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. And they get huge, too. That's not a small animal.
Well, yeah, they can eat small children, and they could definitely kill a man.
Wow, so much for my dog. Good thing I don't live in Florida. So, how many of you people are happy or unhappy with Apple? Well, a French man decided to show how angry he was. He walked into a French Apple store, and for what the article describes as a steel ball, so I'm assuming it's just a giant ball bearing or a shot put, was taking the iPhones that were on display, putting them flat, and smashing them.
Nice.
Apparently did that throughout the store, and... as a guy who's worked retail in the past, I just would have let him do that because, well, he's a person taking a steel ball to iPhones. And my first thought was making a joke about the guy must have been really mad about lack of a headphone jack.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest joke you can make here. I'm just kind of wondering, like, could you get fired for letting somebody do this?
At least I know in America. I don't, because this happened in France. I don't know anything about French law, but American, no. Because there's actually laws that I think if you hurt them would have made their company liable.
Right.
Because, like, for example, like asset protection, house security and stuff, actually have a few laws regarding what you can and can't do. They're not allowed to actually tackle you type of thing.
Yeah.
So, no. And honestly, I doubt they would pay security enough to actually stop a guy with a bowling ball or whatever it actually is. You couldn't pay me enough, because there's a good chance I'm going to get that alongside the head.
Well, I don't know if you got a taser or something.
Now, the guy said something about Apple is a company that violated European consumer rights. Apple is in trouble in, is it China or Japan? I think they're also in trouble in the EU.
Yeah, actually in China, you can actually lose your job for buying an iPhone 7.
Now, the article says the level of consumer unhappiness could be seen as creating a PR problem for Apple, but Apple may be able to turn the video to their advantage.
What if this in of itself is a PR stunt for Apple?
It seems like an expensive stunt.
They can afford it.
It's true. I don't know. I mean, I could definitely see how Apple has definitely done some problems. I know, without getting too deep in the politics, I know the way they do their finances is one of the major issues that I've heard. But I don't know. For me, I could just imagine the guy taking the phone out because I use the headphone jack a lot.
Well, I mean, he was pretty clear about his motives, but...
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I definitely, everybody here at Golden State Media Concepts definitely does not endorse any of this type of behavior.
Well, I couldn't speak for everybody, but at least here at the Technology Podcast, we don't endorse Apple.
No, I don't endorse violence in general, especially not this. If you actually have a problem with any of your technology, contact the manufacturer, contact a lawyer, contact your Congress critter.
Or just, return it.
Exactly. I just don't recommend this. For one, it makes us geeks look a little petty. And I'm extremely pedantic about things I don't like about my phone and other technology, but don't do this, please.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's a little bit mad at Windows 10, too, but you don't see anybody...
Actually, you know what the most annoying thing about Windows 10 is? And this is a real sidebar. There's two control panels. There's a setting panel and a control panel, and having to explain to people what both do has become a nuisance to me in my life.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I can imagine.
Because I've been telling people, oh, yeah, go in the settings panel. You mean this? No, the other one. So believe it or not... Microsoft, you've actually created a problem I didn't think I would actually have. So thank you for that.
One of the things that I always remembered, I used to get to my settings controls through personalize. When I right-click personalize, and that was the way that I would get to it. Now, because I've done that with, I don't know, XP, Windows 7, like
8.1, Vista.
Everything that I've ever used in the past, now I go to right-click personalize, and I can't get there, and I'm always like, what? And then I have to go into, my menu and do it the other way.
I've been having that issue with icons in the desktop. Like anytime I work on somebody's computer, I always turn on my computer, the icon on the desktop. I always turn on a few other ones just because for me working on it, it's actually faster for my workflow. And finding that has been a problem. It's not where it used to be.
Yeah, and it's not like I forget where it is. It just takes me a minute to be like, okay, so where is it? Oh, right.
Because I've got 20 years or 30 years of using Windows from 3.1 to now.
Well, and I've been using a computer since I was like 5.
So only a couple of years ago.
Well, I mean, Windows 95 was my first operating system.
We're definitely going to have an operating system off at some point where we can talk about our very first operating system.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Next episode.
I'm down with that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Jonathan Charney.
And I'm Shay Northrup.
You can check us out anywhere on the interwebs, preferably GSMc, technologypodcast.com. You can also go to Facebook and Twitter. We're Golden State Media Concepts Technology Podcast. This is episode 36. If you have questions, comment, or is an article you'd be interested in us talking about, do me a favor, post a link to Twitter or Facebook, and we'll talk about it. And as always, thank you for listening.
I'm telling you, that iPhone thing, it's an inside job.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Technology Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.